By the time I found my table at Lauren Hayes's wedding, I had already shaken hands with 3 guys I had not seen since college and been told twice that I looked exactly the same. My name is Benjamin Cole. I was 35, and I had driven up from Charlotte expecting one easy weekend in Asheville with people I used to know better than I knew myself. Then Rachel Monroe sat down in the empty chair beside me, glanced at the untouched place setting on my other side, and said, "You came alone?" I told her I had. She held my eyes for half a second longer than normal and asked, "Are you still single?" That was not how Rachel used to ask questions. In college, she normally built a runway first, usually with a joke, and enough room for both of us to pretend nothing serious was happening. The woman sitting beside me at 34 apparently had retired that system. "Still is doing a lot of work there," I said. Rachel smiled into her wine glass. "That sounds like a yes from a man who manages construction schedules for a living." I had not told her what I did yet, which meant she had either done some homework or remembered more from the group chat than I did. I said yes. No girlfriend, no fiancé, no complicated situation waiting somewhere outside the ballroom. Rachel gave one small nod, almost satisfied, and then asked whether I still hated olives. "You're really going to ask that and switch to olives?" I said. She looked at me with the same expression she used to wear when she stole my notes before an exam. I got the answer I needed. Before I could ask what she needed it for, Lauren's father stood to make a toast, and every chair turned toward the dance floor. Rachel and I had been friends through most of college, the kind who could argue for an hour over where to eat, and then split fries because neither of us had ordered enough. There had been moments between us. At least I remembered them that way. But we were never single at the same useful time, and neither of us had pushed hard enough to find out what might happen. After graduation, life scattered everybody. We exchanged birthday messages, reacted to the occasional photo, and knew just enough about each other to call it staying in touch. Nearly 7 years had passed since I had actually sat across from her. The reception made that distance disappear faster than I expected. When our table went for drinks, Rachel walked with me. When the photographer called the old college group together, she was beside me before I realized she had crossed the room. During dinner, she remembered I always stole the crispest potatoes off anybody's plate and pushed hers toward me without comment. None of that meant anything by itself, which was exactly the problem. One detail was coincidence. 4 started looking like intent. Our old rhythm came back with it. Rachel told me I had become aggressively responsible because I checked the time before ordering a second drink. I told her she still confused spontaneity with refusing to plan anything until the last possible second. She said she planned important things, so I asked for one example. Rachel looked straight at me and said, "I chose this seat." Then she reached for her water, as if she had just commented on the weather, while I sat there wondering whether she had always been this direct, and I had somehow forgotten. Later, when half our table disappeared onto the dance floor, Rachel and I stayed behind. She asked about Charlotte, my work, and whether I still spent Sundays fixing things that were not technically broken. I learned she was running brand strategy for an outdoor company in Nashville, and she sounded proud of the life she had built there. What neither of us asked about was college. We kept talking about who we were now, almost as if we had silently agreed that nostalgia was not allowed to make this decision for us. I finally asked why she had wanted to know whether I was single. Rachel watched one of Lauren's cousins make a heroic failure of a spin on the dance floor, then said, "Because I didn't want to spend the whole weekend wondering if I was allowed to flirt with you." That landed harder than anything more dramatic could have. I told her she could have flirted and waited to see whether somebody punched me. She smiled. That sounds inefficient. Coming from Rachel, it was such an absurd sentence that I laughed loud enough for the couple beside us to look over. We danced later, but nothing happened that let me label the night neatly. By the time the reception started thinning out, I had almost convinced myself I was letting a wedding make me sentimental and stupid. Then Rachel found me near the hotel lobby while I was saying goodnight to two old roommates. She waited until they left and asked, "Are you doing anything before brunch tomorrow?" I told her. Brunch was at 11. "I know," she said. "Coffee at 8? I asked if this was another question she already knew the answer to, and she smiled as she headed toward the elevators. 8, Ben. Don't make it a project. I stood there long enough for the elevator doors to close before I noticed she had called me Ben, not Cole, something she rarely did in college unless she was serious. More important, the question from dinner was no longer the part I needed to understand. Rachel already knew I was single. What I needed to figure out was why she had gone out of her way to find that out before the weekend had even really started. Rachel was already in the hotel lobby when I came downstairs at 7:53, holding 2 paper cups and looking entirely too pleased with herself. 7 minutes early, she said. I'm impressed. I took the cup she handed me and asked how she knew what I drank. Black coffee, no sugar. You complained about sweet coffee for 4 straight years. Apparently 7 years had erased enough details for me to forget how much she remembered, and not nearly enough for her to forget the useful ones. We stepped outside into a cool Asheville morning, and instead of heading toward the hotel restaurant, Rachel nodded toward the sidewalk and said there was a coffee shop a few blocks away with actual breakfast if I could survive walking without a project timeline. We had barely reached the next block before she asked whether I had dated seriously since college. I told her there had been 2 relationships long enough to deserve the word, neither dramatic enough to make a good story, and neither right enough to last. Rachel said that sounded suspiciously like a performance review. Would you prefer charts? I asked. She bumped my shoulder with hers and told me this was exactly what she remembered about me. Whenever a question got personal, I did not avoid it completely. I just rebuilt it into something I could answer without getting surprised. I told her that was a harsh accusation from a woman who had opened the weekend by conducting a relationship census before dinner. She laughed, but she did not retreat from it. Rachel told me she had been with someone for almost 3 years after moving to Nashville. They had ended things 8 months earlier because they wanted lives that looked good separately and increasingly awkward when placed next to each other. She did not make him the villain, and that told me more about her than a detailed breakup story probably would have. So, I said, you're single too. Rachel looked sideways at me. You're just now confirming that? I admitted I had assumed it from the question she asked the night before, and she said, Careful, Cole. Assumptions are how buildings fall down. It was exactly the sort of bad construction joke I should have hated, which meant naturally I laughed. We found breakfast in a narrow little place, with 6 tables and a counter facing the street. There was no wedding music, no champagne, no group of old friends watching us rediscover each other. Rachel ordered eggs and stole half my toast anyway, and I caught myself enjoying the fact that the morning felt more normal than the reception had. That mattered because normal was harder to blame on atmosphere. At one point, she asked whether I liked Charlotte enough to stay there permanently, and I gave her the standard answer about work being good, my place being close to everything I needed, and having no strong reason to move. Rachel stirred her coffee for a few seconds longer than necessary. Interesting choice of words, she said. No strong reason. I asked what that was supposed to mean. She said it meant nothing yet, then immediately proved. It meant something by asking how often my company sent me outside the Charlotte area. I told her rarely and asked why she was suddenly conducting geographic research. Rachel looked through the front window toward the street before answering. I interviewed for a job in Charlotte 2 weeks ago. That got my attention fast enough that she noticed. She explained that the position was a senior brand strategy role, with a larger outdoor company, more responsibility, better resources, and the kind of move she had been considering, even before the opening appeared. She was waiting to hear whether they wanted her back for a final interview. For about 5 seconds, my brain made the most flattering possible version of the story. Rachel had applied to move to my city, then found me at a wedding, and asked whether I was single, because somehow those things were connected. Luckily, she knew me well enough to see the thought forming before I embarrassed both of us with it. "I applied before Lauren sent the seating chart," she said. "And before I knew anything about your dating life," I told her. I had not said anything. "Your face did." She leaned back in her chair and added that she liked Nashville and would not leave it because of somebody she had spent one wedding reception flirting with. The statement should have cooled things down. But instead, I liked her more for saying it. We walked for another hour after breakfast, through streets that were only beginning to fill. Rachel told me about the parts of her work she actually cared about, not the polished version people gave at weddings. I told her about a townhouse project that had taught me never to trust anyone who said a permit issue was basically handled. Somewhere between a bookstore window and a park bench, it stopped feeling like we were retrieving old information and started feeling like we were learning each other again. The difference mattered. Rachel was not the 21-year-old who once skipped an entire lecture because somebody told her about a cheap concert 2 towns over. She still liked sudden plans, but now she was responsible for people, budgets, and decisions with actual consequences. I was not the guy who spent 40 minutes deciding whether asking her out might make our friend group weird. At least, I hoped I was not. That thought stayed with me until we reached the hotel again. Rachel stopped before the entrance and asked, "If I don't get the Charlotte job, does this disappear?" I knew exactly what she meant, which made my first instinct to answer carefully even more irritating. I told her I did not know what this was yet. She gave me a look. That wasn't my question. There it was again, the thing she had always been good at. Rachel did not let me replace a question with a safer one, just because I preferred the replacement. So I tried again. I asked myself whether I would want to see her after the weekend, if Charlotte never called her back, if she stayed in Nashville, and if seeing her required actual planning instead of coincidence. The answer came faster than I expected. "Yes," I said. Rachel's expression changed, not dramatically, just enough for me to know that answer had mattered more than she wanted to show. "Good," she said, "because I'd still want to see you too." For once, neither of us covered the moment with a joke immediately. Then Rachel smiled again and rescued us from becoming people who stared meaningfully at hotel entrances. "There's one problem," she said. I asked what. "You haven't actually asked me out." I reminded her that we had just spent 3 hours drinking coffee, eating breakfast, and walking around Asheville alone. She shook her head. "This is wedding spillover. Free sample. Doesn't count." I told her she had invented that rule approximately 4 seconds earlier. "Probably," she said. "But if you mean what you just said, ask me when there's no Lauren, no wedding, and no convenient reason for us to be in the same city." Rachel walked into the hotel before I gave her an answer, which I suspected was deliberate. She had already done her part. She had sat beside me, asked the uncomfortable question, invited me to coffee, and made it perfectly clear that Charlotte was not going to make the decision for either of us. For years I had been good at waiting until I had enough information to feel certain. Standing there with my coffee going cold in my hand, I understood that Rachel was asking for something much simpler. She wanted to know whether I would choose the next step before circumstances chose it for me. I asked Rachel out before I left Asheville. Not in the parking lot. Not through some late-night message after I had spent 3 hours editing the wording. And not after I knew what would happen with Charlotte. I caught her near the hotel elevators before everyone scattered after brunch and said, "Dinner next Saturday. Nashville. A real date. No wedding spillover." Rachel looked at me for a second, then smiled in a way that made me suspicious. She had been waiting to see whether I would actually do it. 7:30, she said, "and don't pick somewhere with exposed brick just because you think that means romantic." I told her I made no promises about brick. The following Saturday, I drove to Nashville instead of asking her to meet halfway. That choice felt important to me, partly because Rachel had already done enough initiating, and partly because I wanted this date to exist, without convenience doing any work for us. I picked a small restaurant near Germantown. Not a college bar. Not somewhere connected to mutual friends, and definitely not a place built around nostalgia. When Rachel walked in wearing a dark green dress and the same direct expression she had worn when asking if I was single, I realized I had spent most of the drive pretending I was calm. She took one look around the room and said, "No exposed brick." I told her I had grown as a person. The first half hour was almost suspiciously easy. We talked about things that had happened since Asheville, not things that happened when we were 21. Rachel told me about a campaign she had been fighting to rescue from a committee that wanted to make everything sound premium and authentic. At the same time, which she described as corporate language for saying absolutely nothing. I told her about a homeowner who had spent 3 weeks changing tile samples and then chosen the first one. She laughed and said that sounded like me with emotional decisions. I told her she was getting reckless with the construction metaphors. "They keep working," she said. The attraction felt different away from the wedding. Cleaner, maybe. There were no old friends nearby to make every shared laugh feel like a callback, and no slow song playing, while people in formal clothes made questionable decisions on a dance floor. Rachel still leaned forward when she got interested in something. I still noticed. She still paused before disagreeing with me, as if giving me one last chance to fix my own argument. I still never took it. What surprised me was how much of what I liked had nothing to do with memory. She had become more patient with people and less patient with nonsense. She listened closely, but she did not soften every opinion just to make a conversation comfortable. I found myself wanting to know what she thought before I knew whether I agreed. After dinner, we walked toward the river because neither of us seemed ready to call it. That was when college finally came up. Rachel asked if I remembered a party senior year, when we had ended up sitting outside on a back staircase while everyone else was inside. I remembered it immediately. She had been dating someone then, technically, though the relationship was already limping toward its end. I had been single and smart enough not to touch that situation. We had sat there talking until almost 2 in the morning, knees nearly touching, both of us aware of something we were not going to act on. "I thought you were going to kiss me," she said. I stopped walking. "You had a boyfriend." Rachel nodded. "I know." I asked why she had wanted me to do something she would have been angry at me for doing. She laughed because the question was fair. I didn't say I was reasonable at 21. Then she admitted she had spent years wondering whether I had ever felt anything at all, or whether she had built the whole thing up in her head. I told her she had not imagined it. I had wanted to kiss her that night, and several other nights, but wanting something did not automatically make acting on it a good idea. Rachel looked at me and said, "That answer is so painfully you." We walked another block before she asked the question that changed the evening. "Do you think we're doing this because we should've done it then?" I knew what she meant. There was an easy version of our story available if we wanted it. Two people who had almost happened in college meet again. Years later, realize fate had been waiting patiently and pick up where they left off. It was neat. It was also mostly nonsense. I told her I did not know the woman walking beside me because I had known her at 21. I knew parts of her. The rest I was learning. Rachel said. Good. Because I don't want to be somebody you finally got around to. That one stayed with me. I told her I did not want that either, then nearly ruined the moment by adding that we should probably be careful not to mistake familiarity for compatibility. Rachel stopped under a streetlight and stared at me. Ben, are you trying to schedule a risk assessment during our first date? I said I was making a reasonable point. She told me it was an excellent point, and also the exact kind of thing I did when I wanted certainty before taking another step. You drove 3 hours to take me to dinner, she said. You clearly wanted to be here. Maybe you can let that be true for 5 minutes, without building an exit strategy around it. She was right enough to annoy me. The strange part was that instead of defending myself, I started laughing. Rachel did too, and whatever tension had tightened between us loosened without disappearing. I told her I did want to be there. More than that, I wanted to do it again. She raised one eyebrow and asked whether that was me asking for a second date. Yes, I said. Before this one is over, since apparently I'm learning efficiency. She considered that, with fake seriousness, and said she might be available if I promised not to turn date 2 into a feasibility study. We ended up sitting outside a small dessert place for another hour, sharing something with too much chocolate, because Rachel ordered it before I could argue. Nothing dramatic happened. I did not make some perfect speech, and she did not confess she had secretly loved me for 7 years. What happened was smaller, and, to me, more convincing. I stopped comparing the woman across from me to the girl I remembered. At some point, I realized I had gone nearly an hour without thinking about college at all. I was simply enjoying Rachel now. When I walked her back to her building, we stood near the entrance longer than necessary. I wanted to kiss her, but I also knew I had spent the whole evening insisting that the present needed to stand on its own. So I did not use 7 years of history as permission. I asked if I could kiss her. Rachel smiled and said, "You really do need everything confirmed." I told her that sounded suspiciously like a yes. It is. The kiss was brief, warm, and completely useless as evidence about destiny, which was probably why I liked it. It did not answer every question. It just made one thing obvious. I wanted another date. I was almost back to my truck when Rachel called my name from the doorway. She was holding her phone now, and the expression on her face had changed. "Charlotte emailed," she said. I walked back toward her. She looked down at the screen once more, then at me. "They want me there Thursday for the final interview." A week earlier, I would have treated that as good news, because it made everything between us easier. Standing there after a date I had driven 3 hours to create on purpose. I understood why that answer was no longer enough. Rachel and I had just proved we could choose each other without Charlotte helping. Now we were going to find out whether we could keep doing that. Once Charlotte made the choice dangerously convenient. Rachel came to Charlotte on Thursday morning for the interview, and I did something that would have surprised the version of me from a month earlier. I stayed out of it. I did not offer to drive her there, did not ask which building, did not send her restaurant recommendations near the office, and definitely did not start telling her which neighborhoods would make the commute easiest if she took the job. She had earned the interview without me, and I knew enough to understand that inserting myself into it would turn a professional decision into a romantic test before either of us was ready for that. So I sent one message at 8:30. "Good luck. Call me when you're done if you want dinner." Rachel replied with a thumbs up and, beneath it, "Stop being normal." "It's unsettling." She called a little after 5. Her voice sounded calm, which with Rachel usually meant she was thinking harder than she wanted anybody to know. I picked her up near the hotel where the company had put her for the night, and we went to a place in South End she had chosen herself. She told me the interview went well, but I noticed she talked about the job differently than she had in Asheville. Before, it had been an opportunity. Now it was real enough to picture, and that made everything around it heavier. She described the team, the scope of the role, the salary increase, and the kind of creative authority she would actually have. Then she stopped and said, "I can hear myself selling it to you." I told her she did not have to. "That's the problem," she said. "I'm not sure whether I'm selling it to you or to me." We left the restaurant and walked a few blocks, because neither of us seemed ready to sit in a car. Rachel had been to Charlotte before, but not like this. She noticed apartment buildings, grocery stores, people walking dogs, the ordinary things you notice when a city might stop being somewhere you visit. I could see the calculation happening, and I hated how easy it would have been for me to help with it. I could have told her which neighborhoods were better, which commute was worse, which side of town made sense. Instead, I asked whether she wanted the job. Rachel gave me a look that said she knew exactly why I had phrased it that way. "I think I do," she said, "but that's not the question I'm worried about." We stopped outside a bookstore that had already closed for the night. Rachel folded her arms and looked at me. "If I turn it down and stay in Nashville, are you still doing this?" I knew what she meant, and I also knew she had been waiting all evening to ask. My first instinct was to tell her, of course, because it sounded like the right answer. Then I realized she was not asking for reassurance. She was asking whether I had quietly made her job offer part of my willingness to keep seeing her. "Yes," I said. Rachel did not smile. "Would you have said that before Saturday? That took longer?" I admitted I probably would have wanted to believe it, but the truth was that part of me had been treating Charlotte as a solution. Rachel looked away toward the dark shop window. "That's what scares me." I told her I understood. She shook her head. "No, I don't mean you. I mean me too. If I take this job and we start dating and it works for a while, I don't want to wonder whether I moved because of you. And if I take it and we don't work, I don't want to turn a good career decision into something I resent." There was no accusation in it. If anything, that made the question harder. She was asking for separation between two choices that had become tangled simply because of timing. I leaned against the brick beside the bookstore and, finally, said, "The thing I should have understood sooner. Then take me out of the decision." Rachel looked back at me. I told her to decide about Charlotte the same way she would have if she had arrived at Lauren's wedding and found out I was married with 3 kids. If the role was right, take it. If it was not, turn it down. She started to say something, but I kept going, because for once I did not want to hide inside careful wording. "And I'll decide about us without using your zip code as an excuse." That got her attention. Rachel asked what exactly I was deciding. I told her I was deciding whether I wanted to keep dating her if it meant 3-hour drives, weekends, schedules, and the occasional week where one of us was too busy to make things convenient. She watched me closely, the way she did when she suspected I was answering around a question. This time I was not. "I already drove to Nashville once, because I wanted to see you," I said. "I can do it again." Rachel's mouth tilted slightly. That almost sounded spontaneous. I told her not to ruin the moment. We sat on a low concrete wall across from the bookstore for another 20 minutes, and the conversation got easier once the main thing was out in the open. Rachel admitted she had been afraid I would treat her possible move as proof that the universe had finally fixed our timing for us. I told her I had come dangerously close to doing exactly that. It was an attractive idea because it required almost nothing from me. If she moved to Charlotte, then suddenly we would be 2 people who happened to be in the same city and happened to like each other. No difficult choice, no distance, no need to admit I wanted something enough to work for it. Rachel said, "You really hate when life doesn't come with a clean plan." I told her I disliked bad sequencing. She laughed and said that was the most Ben answer available. When I dropped her at the hotel, I did not ask if she wanted me to come up, and she did not create a reason for me to stay. That restraint felt more intimate than forcing the night into something it had not earned. Before getting out, Rachel rested her hand on the door handle and said, "If they offer it, I only get a few days to decide." I told her okay. She studied my face. "You're not going to ask what I'm leaning toward?" I said no. "That's growth," she said. "Don't get used to it." The company called her Friday afternoon with the formal offer. I knew because she texted me one sentence. They offered it. I congratulated her, and then I deliberately did not ask what she planned to do. The old version of me would have needed the answer before taking another step. Instead, I checked my schedule, moved one site visit to Monday morning, and booked a hotel in Nashville for Saturday night. Then, I sent Rachel another message. "I'll be there at 6 Saturday. Pick dinner." Her reply came less than a minute later. "You don't even know what I decided." I looked at that sentence for a while before answering. That's the point. For the first time since Rachel had sat beside me at the wedding, I was not waiting for her next move to tell me what mine should be. Whether she accepted Charlotte or stayed in Nashville, I already knew where I was going Saturday. I got to Nashville at 5:48 on Saturday, which Rachel noticed because of course she did. She was waiting outside the restaurant when I pulled up, arms folded, smiling like somebody who had caught me doing exactly what she expected. 12 minutes early," she said when I got out. "You really know how to make a woman feel spontaneous." I told her I had spent 3 hours on the highway and was not going to waste the achievement by being late. She laughed, but there was something different underneath it. She knew why I had come. More importantly, she knew what I still did not know. Rachel had picked a quiet Italian place near her apartment. We made it through drinks, and most of dinner without mentioning Charlotte, which became increasingly ridiculous, because the answer was sitting between us like a third person at the table. She told me about a campaign meeting that had gone badly. I told her about a subcontractor who had somehow installed 6 cabinet doors backward. We laughed in the right places, but I could feel both of us moving around the same subject. Finally, Rachel put her fork down and said, "Ben, I'm going to tell you what I decided." I stopped her before she could. "Not yet." She stared at me. "You drove 3 hours, and now you don't want to know?" I told her I wanted to know very badly, which was exactly why I needed to say something first. Rachel leaned back and waited. A month earlier, I probably would have organized the whole thing in my head before opening my mouth. That night, I did not have a perfect version. I just had the truth. I told her I wanted to keep dating her, seriously. Not until the novelty wore off. Not until one of us got busy. And not only if Charlotte made everything convenient. If she stayed in Nashville, I would make the drive. If she moved, then we would figure out what dating in the same city looked like, without pretending proximity was the reason we worked. Rachel did not immediately smile or reach across the table. She looked at me for several seconds, which was fair considering I had spent most of our history making her wait for clear answers. Then she asked, "Why?" I laughed once, because only Rachel could hear exactly what she wanted, and still demand the supporting documentation. She did not laugh back. "I'm serious. Are you choosing me? Because we almost happened in college, and this feels like getting another shot at the story?" I thought about the easiest answer and rejected it. College had mattered. Pretending otherwise would have been dishonest. It explained why seeing her at the wedding had hit me so quickly, and why 3 hours of breakfast could feel strangely familiar. But it was not why I had driven to Nashville twice. "College is why I recognized you," I said. "It's not why I came back." Rachel's expression softened, but I kept going. I told her I liked the woman who could run an entire creative team and still make terrible construction jokes. I liked that she asked questions before I was ready, and then refused to accept the answer I gave, just because it sounded responsible. I liked that she had protected her own career from becoming our romantic shortcut. I liked who I was becoming around her too, not some different person, just a version who acted before every uncertainty had been removed. Rachel looked down at the table for a moment. When she looked up again, her eyes were wet enough that she was irritated about it. That was almost annoyingly good, she said. I told her I had practiced absolutely none of it, and therefore expected extra credit. That finally made her laugh. Then she reached into her bag, took out her phone, and placed it face down between us. I accepted Charlotte yesterday. I had expected the answer to hit me harder. Instead, the first thing I felt was relief for her, not for us. For her. Rachel had wanted the job before she knew what I wanted, and she had chosen it after making sure I would not turn the decision into evidence about our relationship. I asked if she was happy about it. She nodded. Terrified, but yes. Then she admitted, she had almost told me the second I arrived, partly because knowing we would be in the same city felt too good to keep quiet. But after that text you sent, she said, I wanted to know what you would choose before you knew I made it easy. I told her she had become extremely demanding since college. I've improved, she said. That was when I reached across the table and took her hand. It was not dramatic. Nobody around us noticed. But it felt more consequential than anything we had done since the wedding because there was nothing left hiding underneath it. Rachel had made the career choice she wanted. I had made the relationship choice I wanted. Neither one existed as payment for the other. We walked back toward her apartment after dinner. At the entrance, Rachel stopped and looked at me with a familiar challenge in her face. So what happens now, project manager? I told her. Now I drove home Sunday, worked Monday, and came back the following weekend. She laughed. That's your romantic answer? I said it was the realistic one. Then I added that I wanted us exclusive if she did. Rachel's smile disappeared for half a second before returning softer. I do. I kissed her then, not because a kiss was supposed to finish the scene, but because for the first time, neither of us needed it to answer anything. Rachel still had 5 weeks left in Nashville before the new job started. I drove there 3 of those weekends. She came to Charlotte once and stayed in a hotel because we both agreed that immediately, pretending we lived together would be a ridiculous overcorrection for 7 years of doing nothing. We had crowded schedules. One date ruined by a work call, another cut short because I had to leave early Sunday morning, and a Wednesday night when we barely managed 20 minutes on the phone. None of it felt cinematic. That was why I trusted it. We were learning whether the relationship worked, while inconvenience was still present. When Rachel finally moved to Charlotte, I helped carry boxes into her apartment. Somewhere around the 4th trip from the truck, she stood in the doorway holding a lamp and started laughing. I asked what was funny. You know this is the first normal thing we've ever done? She said. She was right. No wedding, no old college friends, no job decision hanging over us, no 3-hour drive to prove a point. Just boxes, bad parking, and Rachel telling me I was putting the kitchen stuff in the wrong room. I told her she had hired the wrong man if she expected me to take moving instructions gracefully. A few months later, Lauren invited most of the old college group to Charlotte for dinner. I arrived before Rachel, because she was coming straight from work. People were already seated when she walked in, and there was one empty chair beside me. Rachel did not ask whether anyone was sitting there. She dropped her bag behind it, sat down, and stole a piece of bread off my plate before saying hello. Lauren noticed and laughed. Some things really don't change. She was wrong, though. Almost everything important had changed. At the wedding, Rachel had taken the chair beside me because she needed to know whether there was still a possibility. That night in Charlotte, she sat there because the possibility had already become a choice we were living with every day. For years, I thought Rachel and I had simply suffered from bad timing in college. Looking back, timing was only part of it. We had both spent a long time waiting for circumstances to make the risk smaller. The second time around, the difference was not that life finally made everything easy. It was that neither of us waited for easy before deciding. If someone from your past sat beside you and asked, "Are you still single?" would you assume they were just cashing up? Or would you ask why they wanted to know? If you enjoyed the story, leave your answer in the comments, hit like, and subscribe for more.